So the four of us met in St. Augustine in February. Um, Carol is an MD specializing in functional and holistic medicine in Southwest Florida. She was a radio host in that same geographic area for a number of years. Douglas is a licensed mental health counselor in the St. Pete area, and I believe you've done that for over 45 years. Linda, a journalist for Natural Awakenings magazines. She was the author of the featured articles in the magazine, focusing on health, well-being, and much more. And I have been almost a lifelong student of consciousness, the nature of consciousness, and sustainability. And much of that, what I learned and what I did was as a result of my collaborations over the years with Edgar Mitchell. So why did we come up with the name grokking? Well, there's several reasons for it. Grokking is a word from a science fiction writer in the 1960s or 70s. To grok is to know something profoundly, experientially, intellectually, emotionally, intuitively. It's a very visceral feeling. It's a total knowing. It's like what happened to Edgar as he was coming back from the moon in space. He grokked that the universe was intelligent. He felt it in the depth of his bones. So that was one of the reasons. There are other reasons as well, but that's probably sufficient. So what we would like to do today is present how we see carrying forward Edgar's legacy. Um, we'll talk about where humanity is right now, the likely scenarios that will develop over time if we continue on the same path we've been on. We'll also talk about an alternative future, which we know is possible and probably one that we all want. And then we'll talk about tools, information, and other resources to help us make the transition to that alternative future. I'm sure you're all familiar with what's on this slide. I don't need to go into any detail, but humanity is more dependent, we're more dependent upon each other than we ever have been throughout all of human history. We don't make our own clothes, grow our own food, provide energy to sustain us. We rely on others to do that for us. And because of that, we have the highest standard of living we've ever had throughout all of history, but it also makes us more vulnerable. And all these things interplay with each other, putting us in a very precarious position. So one of the reasons that all these things, which collectively referred to as the polycrisis, is they represent a complex situations where you have multiple interconnecting and interacting crises that all converge at the same time. You can't predict what's going to happen in the future, as we have been able to do in the past, where it's just a linear extension of what came before. You know, better standard of living, more leisure time, more great technology to make our life easier, etc. Um, what we face when you have continuous growth with positive feedback is where a change in a system causes the system to continue to change in the same direction. A good example of that is a thermostat in your house. Let's say somebody wired it up incorrectly, and when instead of the air conditioner came on, the heat came on. So you want the house to cool, but because of the incorrect wiring, the house warms again, which leads to only more likelihood that the heat is going to stay on for longer and longer time. So eventually you get to a point, what's called a tipping point. And generally, anytime you have a positive feedback, you have an exponential curve. And exponential curves are extremely dangerous. If you look at this bar graph, This happens to be taken from a French nursery rhyme about lily pads covering a pond over time, where they double in size every day. And let's suppose it takes 30 days. But the doubling interval could be hours in the case of bacteria in a petri dish. It could be years in the case of human lifespan. Um, but what happens is at first the growth is imperceptible, it's unnoticeable, and very slowly you start seeing the numbers increase, but not to be of any concern. At some point down the road, before you run out of resources, all of a sudden the growth becomes noticeable. And then it just takes off in the last 3 or 4 doubling periods before you run out of resources. And the problem is the amplifying effects at the end becomes so large and so violent that it's almost impossible to stop the doubling to turn things around. And I submit to you that this is where we are right now in the evolution of human beings if we don't change our waves. When you get to this bend of the curve, things are about to spiral out of control, and there's very little time to react and change course. So we face existential threats. I already talked about the vulnerability. The longer we wait, the less time there is to mitigate and change the situation. But there's also an opportunity. And the opportunity is to change from the chaos, the disorder, the deterioration, and destruction to one of syntropy, to focusing on a new kind of being, one that's based on emergence of harmony, love, equity, and a general flourishing. No matter what our leaders tell us, whether they be political or business or institutional, humanity evolved within nature and exists as part of nature. We're not separate from nature and we don't have any control over it. If we don't abide by nature's rule, nature is always going to have the last word and we will suffer the consequences. So the time is now to recognize the situation we're in and to do something about it. Douglas?
Here's some possible scenarios. This comes from the book Life After Doom by Brian McLaren. Many of us in this group have read this book. It's excellently, it's very well written. I'll say that. Possible scenarios that he is outlining in the book. The first one is collapse avoidance, and then a partial collapse with a rebound, then collapse with pockets of survival. And the worst, obviously, is total collapse and extinction. He notes that the longer humanity waits to take serious mitigating actions, as you saw in that graph of the lily pond, the more likely scenarios 3 and 4 become. Nature will always have the last words, as Bob just said. We are aligned with an intelligent earth and a conscious universe. So these are some of the possible scenarios that he is outlining in his book. I want to more hone in on this collapse avoidance. Next, Bob. This I call business as usual, collapse avoidance, where humanity kind of wakes up and responds with sufficient urgency, but there's some downward spiral. Resource wars become more common, as the author points out, suffering, reduction in standard of living, scarcity. He notes, and I quote from page 27 of the book, because the needed transformation process will be long, difficult, and messy, we will face many turbulent decades or even centuries before we reach a new sustainable normal. What we are presenting here in Grokking Wholeness will be a fifth scenario. Yes, it's acknowledging that these are possible, absolutely, that these are possible scenarios. We are not to deny or ignore them, but we also want to bring about a new scenario. And that's what much of the presentation will be about. How to avoid this, even this scenario, scenario number one, when we come to what we're calling scenario number five, which will be coming shortly. And Bob, if you would, and Linda, if you want to take over, please.
Oh, yes. Greedy and vested interest want to maintain the status quo. The the mainstream media is doing its best to ignore a movement, I think. This is the consciousness movement that we are all experiencing now. And what they're doing is spreading misinformation. And when I started, I wrote an article probably about 5 or 6 years ago on the importance of independent media. At that time, there were only 6 corporations who owned all of our media. And way back before then, there were 50. So we've gone from 50 to 6, and most of them are spreading misinformation. And so it's important to listen to something that you feel is uplifting and I would think anything to do with consciousness is a good thing to listen to in the morning. I'm not saying that you shouldn't listen to the news, but you should not dwell on it. Next, Bob. And yes, meaningful and lasting change is hard. You know, it's like I say I'm going to meditate every day for 15 minutes or a half hour, and things come up and we don't do it. And we postpone and we postpone. And so it it takes that to overcome your beliefs and emotions that you have about what's going on in the world. Many people are frightened and don't know where to turn. But the best place to turn is inward because that's where your resources personally live. So we need a sense of urgency. Everything, as Douglas explained, is upon us now. And so coming together in community and helping each other out with like what we do on Mondays is very important. Creating a field of a lasting field is what we need to do. Next, Bob.
This is the next scenario that we want to present here and highlight this scenario. Sharon Joy talked about the book Global Mind Change by Willis Harman. It changed my life, frankly, very much. There's like 4 or 5 cardinal books on my shelves that changed my life. This was one of the first, not the very first. To me, this is the way of wholeness. This is where we are evolving. Scenario one, as I presented earlier, was collapse avoidance, which was business as usual. And gradually, we're doing better as a species. And as he noted in that quote, after much suffering, perhaps decades of suffering, what we want to highlight here and promulgate is a scenario five, also collapse avoidance, but it's vis-a-vis transformation and being better. It's not just about doing better, it's being better. This is our evolving potential, what's called Homo Noeticus. And this is thanks to Edgar Mitchell, as Bob has been talking about, brought us into this idea that we are evolving into a new species that not only understands our interconnectedness, but embodies the interconnectedness and then applies the interconnectedness in our lives. This is collective transformation, essentially. From a Taoist perspective, the doing is part of the yang aspect of our being. There's nothing wrong with it. It doesn't make it bad. But now we're looking at our being, our yin aspect. Our being asks the question of all of us, Who am I really as a being, as a human being? Who am I? What am I? And then the yang aspect is then what am I here to do? Hinduism, we call it our dharma, or Buddhism, we call it our dharma. We have our Buddha, our dharma, and our sangha. Our Buddha is recognizing that it is us. We are part of this intelligence, the Earth's natural intelligence and the intelligence of the cosmos flows through each of us. This is heart-centered stuff here. Who are we? And then what are we here to do? By understanding, embodying, and applying individually and collectively this shift in consciousness. This is the scenario 5, is recognizing balance, harmony, our interconnectedness. This again is heart-centered. I'm going to read one quote. I just found that actually in rereading of a book. And many of you are going to be aware of this because this is the book by Shelley, our own Shelley Darling, who's one of us on the Florida network. She says, living from heart-centered consciousness restores our sense of wholeness, offering strength, stability, and a clear sense of self. It expands the meaning of home into something much greater, connecting us with the vastness of nature. Navigating Home, which is the title of the book, Navigating Home reunites our individual heart consciousness with the broader realms of reality, nature, earth, and the cosmos, making us feel part of something larger. And this, to me, is our expansion into global mind change, that we are all a part of this. Again, that intelligence runs through us. Nature's intelligence, the consciousness of the universe, looking at what is consciousness, it's looking within our heart space to find that. This, to me, is our evolutionary impulse. In the words of Barbara Marx Hubbard, who wrote about Homo universalis. Barbara was one of my mentors, and she wrote about Homo universalis. We are becoming universal beings. This is our evolutionary thrust. Okay, on to the next slide, please, and Carol's brilliance.
So that would be me. So I get to do the happy part, which is wonderful. So we start with the wake-up call, and we each experience that in different ways. There are many ways to get that wake-up. Not all of us are able to do it through space travel, but that works too. Many of us get our wake-up through suffering. And that's probably what's going to happen to the majority of humans. But many of us, and I expect most of us on this call, have done it because we see a need for a greater truth than what was handed to us by our culture. So we've been doing meditation, we've been doing breath work, we've been doing ecstatic dance, drumming, ritual. We find our truth in nature. We find our truth in psychedelics. And in fact, what we're doing is we are awakening the goddess part. No one's mentioned yet, although Douglas has with the yin yang, that we are out of balance in a patriarchal society. And once we realize that, we can find our yin, we can find our goddess. And so this young lady has had her epiphany, the picture on the left, and she's just so happy that she can shed the cultural heaviness that has kept us down. And so the next picture is the young man who had his epiphany yesterday, and now he is redefining his relationship with nature. And the local ecosystem, namely our trees, our plants, our animals, are patiently standing by, waiting for us to wake up. And once we have, we will bring our newfound consciousness to our collective and global environment. So when we change ourselves, the tendencies in the world will also change. So also the attitude of the world becomes different to us. So we become, I want to call it gyne Noeticus, just for balance. I hope you understand what that means. Gyne means the female aspect. So let's go to the next slide. And we find that as we become more aware that we grow and we change everything around us. And I want to add here that there is good news with that exponential change, because we see what's happening in the bad side. We are not quite yet aware, or maybe we are, but most people are not, that that kind of exponential change has been happening since at least I became aware in the 1960s. And people like us have been growing and changing ever since. We forget, we go back, we learn, we unlearn, but in fact, we have been growing and we are becoming the lily pads that are going to cover the pond in a good way. And once we have seen the light and seen the need, we will come up with the answers. So those answers can include sustainable environment, harmony with nature, renewable resources, green technologies, and I would add holistic and root cause medicine to replace drug therapy, surgeries, and all the rest. So we are growing the new human. We have already created a nervous system for the new human. We call it the internet. And the internet is good and bad, but the good aspect of it is that we are all connected now, literally. Anyone with a phone can be connected with anyone on the planet. One of the most important things is to recognize that the planet is finite and that we must learn how to recycle and reuse everything. So I would mention the book Cradle to Cradle. I forgot who wrote it, William something, but it's a powerful argument for reusing and recycling. So next. It is a biological imperative to change. Change happens when enough pressure causes that change. So I would point out that it was a huge change in consciousness when single cell organisms decided or were pressured into the becoming multicellular organisms in which the individual cell gives up its immortality and in exchange takes on a particular job. And that job might be being a liver cell or being a brain cell. And the change that will happen for us at this point in time is no less cataclysmic than that change from single cell to multi-cell. And indeed, Deepak is correct. All great changes are preceded by chaos. At the same time, we are developing the mindset and the technology to make that huge change to become Homo Noeticus. And with that, I'll pass it on.
Okay, so how do we make the change happen? Well, if you look at this chart, for those of you who are students of psychology, you probably have heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect. And basically what it says is that most people think they know more than they know. In other words, they don't know what they don't know, so therefore they understand the surface of something, and without diving into the details, they don't realize the underlying complexity of most things. And if you look at the vertical axes, the vertical axis going up is a benefit to others. On the going down, it's harmful to others. The horizontal axis, harmful to themselves or to the left, and benefit to themselves to the right. So what's in red are the four categories of people, well, actually five if you count the ineffective group that's in the middle of those two intersecting lines. Unfortunately, most people are to the left-hand side of the vertical line. And the most dangerous are the ones in the lower left quadrant, because not only are they harmful to themselves, but they're also harm others because of their closed-minded, fixed belief and biases, inability to accept criticism, not realizing what they don't know. The wisest people, on the other hand, are in the upper right quadrant, who have a whole different set of characteristics. So if you're trying to move people from the lower left to the upper right, you can't do it by argument. You can't do it by debate. You have to develop trust and rapport with those people and lead them to examine their own beliefs, biases, and understandings so they can move from the lower left to the upper right. So how do you do that? Well, the way you do it is first, you educate yourself and through your own personal growth. And once you've done that, then you can do what we refer to as conscious activism or sacred activism, where you promote that education and awareness beyond yourself. And there's numerous ways to do that. The third major bullet on the bottom, collaboration and dialogue. We have to reach out to those people in the lower left-hand quadrant, build trust, try to understand where they're coming from, get them to examine their underlying beliefs. And there's a whole series of techniques, which we don't really have time to go into today, that help make that thing happen. So, as Socrates once said almost 2,500 years ago, let him that would move the world first move himself. So, this is not necessarily a new idea.
Conscious evolution via sacred activism is our next part. I talked about three aspects of consciousness earlier. Number one was the understanding, just being aware what's going on within and around us, and then the embodiment. And we had that experience of feeling, really feeling it. And the third aspect of consciousness then is the application. What do we do about it, as Bob had in his last slide? How do we embrace this? How do we apply this in our own lives? And I'm going to talk a bit about sacred activism, which is a path of application. These are all part of consciousness. Everything is consciousness. The consciousness of the earth, again, taking action for the earth, recognizing what's happening, as Bob had in his graphs and all that, but being a part of the change. The threefold path, and this is from the Brooklyn Center for Sacred Activism. Number one is the holy imagination. This is using our creativity. This is actually tapping into the wisdom of the universe where we can co-create solutions depending on your own proclivity. What are you passionate about from your field? It could be in the field of healthcare. It could be in the field of land tenure, working with agriculture. It could be in governance. It could be in the sciences or media. to use our imagination. How am I going to bring forth this new world that we can envision? In the words of Charles Eisenstein, the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. So using our holy imagination, then there's holy compassion, opening up to our heart space. Again, this is not cognitive knowing. This is embodiment, the holy compassion. And then holy rebellion. I like to compare this to the famous words of John Lewis. This is good trouble, folks. This is really stepping up to the plate, being a part of this movement, joining this rebellion. It's sacred, but it's also rebellious. We are co-conspiring to bring about a world that works for all, aligning our actions and our values, aligning with that impulse, that evolutionary impulse from nature. It's called holotropism. Holotropism, if you think of the plant, they lean toward the sun, phototropic. We lean toward wholeness, holotropic. And this is part of the holo movement, which I'll be presenting on a lot on grokking wholeness on our website. I've got a series coming up on the holo movement. We are evolving into our wholeness. Holy imagination, holy compassion, holy rebellion. And with that, I think I'm complete on that slide. And Linda, please.
Oh, yes, yes. Well, we would really appreciate if all of you would go to our website, grokkingwholeness.info, and sign up. We just put out our first, I believe, our first newsletter, our announcement yesterday. And we have all kinds of resources on our website for articles, podcasts, and some are ours, and others are other people's that we have found on the internet who explain consciousness, who have dialogues on consciousness, and so you can learn a lot from our website. You can contribute contents if you're interested. We would like to hear from you. You could submit articles to our website and we can post those. Mostly we just want you to get educated with the tools and the issues and the solutions, because there are solutions that are happening right now. It's just that the media does not cover them. And the best thing that you can do is to find a tribe other than maybe our Florida network, and create your own community, your own Sangha. Where you can practice your spirituality, your singing, whatever you want with the group, and build your own field. So it's really good to connect with like-minded and like-hearted people. It really makes a huge difference when you listen to their stories about maybe their first call, what's happening to them, where they have been putting their presence. So I think all in all, you'll find everything that you really need to either spur more interest or learn something on our website. That's it.
Okay. This slide right here shows some of the things that we've done right now. We have a lot of content on our YouTube channel called Grokking Wholeness. If you do a search in YouTube, it'll take you there. I think we have 18 videos posted so far. So between the YouTube channel and our website, a lot of the material that was covered in this slide presentation is covered in much more detail in those two other places. As Linda said, our newsletter went out for the first go around yesterday morning. And it'll be going out monthly or bi-monthly, whatever we decide. And we have 3 online classes on Zoom that we will be offering starting in September. Douglas has a class called the Cosmic Cafe Book Salon. Um, I will be doing a class on explorations into the nature of consciousness. And Carol has one called Staying Healthy in a Sick Society. We also have more coming. So if you'd be interested in any of these things, subscribe, visit our website, YouTube channel, or other social media outlets, and contribute. We're not asking for money. We're not trying to make any money on this. We want to contribute content, ideas, resources, skills. Go out and start your own groups, get involved, get people involved so we can change the mindset of the people on the planet. I'm not going to talk about this slide, but I think you should have a pretty good feel by now of what the intention of Grokking Wholeness is all about. So I've posted our mission and vision on this particular slide. What's in red is the key takeaway, a portal for information and tools about conscious evolution to wholeness. So that covers the formal presentation. So thanks for your patience. I know it isn't always pleasant. Sometimes facts are painful, but we can't ignore facts. They can also offer hope for a better future. So anyways, thanks for your attention.